Penguin Random House Audio presents Air-Borne, The Hidden History of the Life We Breathe, by Carl Zimmer. Read for you by Joe Achman. To Charlotte, who has delighted her parents from her first breath. Sky is omnipresent, even in darkness under the skin. Wisława Szymborska. Prologue. That's where it is. The musicians walked on stage first, 3 carrying violins, 1 a cello. The 5th sat down at a grand piano. They were greeted with waves of sound as the audience in the auditorium struck their hands together in applause. The applause grew stronger as dozens of singers streamed out from both wings, the men in black tuxedos, the women wearing bright scarves draped over black dresses. Older singers, some walking with canes, settled down in the 2 rows of chairs behind the musicians. The younger ones stepped onto the low bleachers behind the chairs. Now, all in place, they faced the audience. Out of the 90 people assembled on stage, 4 wore masks. There were about 170 people in the audience on the night of May 6, 2023, a gathering of friends, families, and unconnected lovers of music from the northwestern corner of Washington state. They had traveled to McIntyre Hall in Mount Vernon for the spring performance of the Skagit Valley Chorale. One member of the choir taught 5th grade, and her tween fan army, done up in rhinestones and taffeta, buzzed overhead in the balcony. Some people in the audience wore pale blue surgical masks that fit loosely over their mouths. Others wore N95s that sealed tight. What would have seemed strange in 2019 seemed fairly normal 4 years later. As the applause died down, a short woman with a gray page boy walked to the front of the stage. She unclipped a microphone from its stand and introduced herself as Ruth Backlund. A retired high school French teacher and the president of the chorale's board, Backlund welcomed the audience. "I have 2 thoughts about gratitude," she said. "I'm very grateful for Skagit County, which runs from the mountains to the sea. If you look in the woods, everything is blooming. And I am grateful for all the scientists who made the vaccines that let us be here." The audience clapped again. Backlund introduced Yvette Burdick, the choir director. "She is the best teacher I ever had," Backlund said. Burdick strode on stage in a flowing black pantsuit and low gray pumps. "Thank you," Burdick said with a quick bow. "We are going to start right off." The choir began with a hymn. At Burdick's cue, the singers dropped their diaphragms. They inhaled the concert hall air deep into their lungs, into the fine alveoli at the deepest tips of their airways. The oxygen in the air seeped into their bloodstreams, while carbon dioxide outgassed. The singers then let their lungs deflate, and the altered air made its way back up through their bronchi, into their tracheas, and through their larynxes. Bands of muscle buzzed in the upwelling breeze and produced a spectrum of sound. The singers set their mouths into different shapes to sculpt the acoustic waves as they escaped. The sound raced across the hall, the waves jostling molecules of air and bouncing off walls. The waves ended up in our auditory canals, making our eardrums vibrate and generating electrical signals that entered our brains, where they produced the perception of sound. The physics of the air joined us in a communion as the choir shared songs about gratitude, for the earth, for liberation from slavery, for love. "Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm," the vibrations told us. On May 5, 2023, the day before the spring concert, the World Health Organization made a major announcement. Speaking in Switzerland at a press conference, WHO Director Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus declared that COVID-19 was no longer a public health emergency of international concern. 3 years and 5 months had passed since the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 emerged in Wuhan, China. COVID-19, a disease never seen before, became the worst public health disaster of modern times, infecting the majority of people on Earth. By the time Tedros made his announcement, it had killed about 25 million of them. Some of the first people in the world to get COVID-19 stood before us on the McIntyre Hall stage. On March 10, 2020, 58 members of the Skagit Valley Chorale had become infected at a rehearsal. Before the month was out, 3 were in the hospital. 2 of them died. The outbreak brought horror to the choir and also shock. They knew that some diseases can spread in droplets slathered on doorknobs or fired at close range in coughs and sneezes, but subsequent research would reveal that the Skagit Valley Chorale outbreak was likely spread on a song. An infected singer released an invisible cloud of droplets so tiny that they resisted gravity and floated like smoke. She did not cough or sneeze to unleash the viruses. They escaped with every breath. COVID-19, in other words, was airborne. 3 years later, at the May 2023 concert, the members of the Skagit Valley Chorale were once again releasing fine droplets from their airways. The audience, listening silently, exhaled them as well. It is an inevitable part of breathing. Some of the tiny droplets drifting through the hall carried living things. Some carried harmless bacteria that feast on the traces of meals left in people's mouths long after they leave the dinner table. Some droplets carried viruses that infect bacteria that dwell in our lungs. A few harbored fungal spores. My wife Grace and I sat a few rows from the stage. We hoped that no one around us was emitting a pathogen that we might inhale. While the COVID-19 emergency had just ended, the coronavirus that caused it had become a part of our lives. "This virus is here to stay," Tedros had warned the world at his press conference the day before. "It is still killing, and it's still changing. The risk remains of new variants emerging that cause new surges in cases and deaths." If the air did indeed harbor COVID-19, we could hope that the concert hall's ventilation system would protect us. It flushed out some of the indoor air, along with the droplets and the carbon dioxide, and replaced it with fresh air from outside. I could not see this invisible traffic, but I could track it. From my coat pocket, I discreetly slipped out a white plastic box the size of a pack of cards. It displayed a number, 527. In other words, the concentration of carbon dioxide in McIntyre Hall was 527 parts per million. Outside, the level was hovering a little lower, around 420. A puff of exhaled air coming out of a mouth has a concentration of 40,000 parts per million. Puff after puff, the choir and the audience steadily added carbon dioxide into the auditorium. If anyone was exhaling SARS-CoV-2, the viruses would accumulate around us as well. As the songs progressed, from Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring to a poem by Theodore Roethke, I checked the monitor. It rose to 662, then 800. If it got much higher, I thought to myself, I would put on my mask. I did not own a carbon dioxide monitor before the COVID-19 pandemic. I did not think much about the atmosphere that we share in concert halls and kitchens and subway cars. Few people did. In the first weeks of 2020, Ruth Backlund certainly gave it no thought. Each Tuesday, she and her husband, Mark, a retired psychiatrist, rehearsed with the Skagit Valley Chorale. They would drive east from their home on Fidalgo Island onto the mainland. They would pass flat fields of tulips, daffodils, and potatoes until they reached Mount Vernon, a city of 35,000 on the banks of the Skagit River. To the east, the Cascade Mountains loomed. The Backlunds made their way to the Presbyterian Church on the edge of town, a building shaped like a wedge of cake turned on its side. They got out of their car and walked into Fellowship Hall, a low-slung room extending off one side of the church. The Backlunds always looked forward to working with Burdick, who drove up from Seattle for the rehearsals. She held the singers to high standards, but she never became a dour disciplinarian. "If people are uncomfortable or unhappy, they can't sing very well," Burdick told me. "I have a tendency to be the Pied Piper. We all go off to music land." When Burdick first heard about COVID-19, it seemed like a faraway disease. It certainly didn't make her rethink meeting with the choir each Tuesday. In February, when reports surfaced that COVID-19 was striking a nursing home 60 miles south of Mount Vernon, it sounded like a variation on influenza. The flu came every winter, and no one made a major change to their life when it did. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention told the public that they could avoid getting influenza by keeping 6 feet away from people displaying symptoms. The droplets released in coughs and sneezes were heavy enough that they would quickly fall to the floor. If those droplets got onto a doorknob or a turnstile or some other surface, the viruses might survive long enough to be picked up by someone else. but they could be readily stopped simply by cleaning the surfaces.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?